From Joe Rogan inviting a controversial personality like Alex Jones to his show, to misinform fans about the dangers of COVID-19, these are all the times he left fans shocked. For starters, he once invited controversial personality Alex Jones to his show. Now, if you're lucky enough to not know who Alex Jones is, let me be the one to tell you that he's a radio show host. And basically a full-on conspiracy theorist. The guy even claimed that the Sandy Hook shooting was staged. That should tell you enough about the kind of content he peddles, and despite that, for some reason, Joe thought it would be a great idea to invite him onto his podcast. After the episode aired, both Joe and Alex began trending. And let's just say the fans were not happy. Many people called Joe out for giving a platform to a person like Alex, who has hurt thousands of people with the kind of rhetoric he spews out. I mean, even platforms like Facebook and YouTube have banned the guy. So it's really not a great look for Joe to be inviting him over to his podcast. It's safe to say he received a ton of fan criticism for this, and it feels like it was pretty well deserved. I mean, what else do you expect to get? When inviting a guy who makes claims about chemicals turning frogs gay or that aliens built the pyramids. But that's not even the most controversial Joe Rogan moment. There's also the time he left fans completely shaken after a clip of him saying the N-word resurfaced. Yeah, this was truly a new low for Joe, if you ask me. It happened in 2020, and at the time, Joe was supporting Sanders and giving him tons of praise. But, of course, there was a subsection of Rogan's audience that wasn't really happy with the fact that he was a Bernie supporter. And, well, they decided to dig up stuff from his past to really make him look bad. It's safe to say they succeeded, because someone found an old clip of him saying the N-word. And I'm not talking about a single slip-up. The guy kept going on and on. It's pretty tough to watch, so it's no surprise that his fans called him out for it. Many of them were left shocked, but some fans felt like it was just par for the course at this point. Joe has shown countless times that he's all too comfortable saying racist things. In another tweet that resurfaced during this time, he made a pretty racist comparison between a black neighborhood and the movie Planet of the Apes. Hilariously, he added that this was just a way for people to make Bernie look bad. Joe, Bernie wasn't the one who looked bad in this case? Oh, and he also used the "it was just a joke" defense. But the fans were really not having it, just like another time when he was openly transphobic. Rogan came under fire when he shared his thoughts on Fallon Fox. To those who may not know, Fallon is a trans MMA fighter who identifies as a woman, but for some reason, Joe claimed to know more about Fox's body than she did, and said that he simply disagreed with her opinion. See, here's the thing. Fallon was assigned male at birth, but since then she's undergone gender-affirming surgery. Despite her claiming that she's a woman now, Joe just couldn't help himself, but misgender her throughout that episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. That didn't exactly go over well with his fans, who felt like he went too far, especially when you consider that he invited Abigail Shrier to the show. She's the author of a pretty transphobic book that talks about the damage that the transgender craze is doing to America's daughters. And get this, not only was Abigail invited, but she was pretty much allowed to promote her book. In fact, Joe even shared some of the book's controversial views, which is a really bad look considering the number of problematic things it says. Fans felt that it was really careless and harmful of Joe to give someone like Abigail such a massive platform, because it's clear that she was just using it to cause even more hate for trans people. And if all that wasn't enough, Joe even called out Caitlyn Jenner, saying that the reason she transitioned was because of her ex-wife Kris and their daughters. As you'd expect, Caitlyn wasn't having any of this and called Rogan a homophobic, transphobic ass. But I'm only just getting started with the times Joe shocked fans. Remember that time when he said that white men were being silenced in America? Out of all the minorities that may feel like their voices aren't heard, it seems that Joe stands most with white men. How brave of him, truly. Rogan got into trouble for saying this back in 2021. He blamed cancel culture for this, and said that people, in their race to be more woke, were targeting white men. He also suggested that eventually, there will come a time when white men just won't be allowed to speak or even express themselves. Some people felt like Joe was being way too hyperbolic with all this, while others felt like he was trying to belittle and downplay the struggles of actual minorities by indicating that they somehow weren't actually oppressed as much as white men supposedly are. That said, there was even so much hate sent his way that Joe felt the need to rephrase what he said. Rogan added that he may not have properly understood what the crux of his message was the first time around, and he clarified that he meant to say that the current woke culture is the problem. He added that people seem to think that by canceling everything, they'll reach some kind of woke utopia, when that really isn't the case. But of course, fans were pretty shocked by his comments and said that this just felt like he was preemptively trying to save himself from getting canceled, because the next time he says something outlandish, which, considering it's Joe, will be pretty often, he can just say that it's the woke mob coming after him again. And if all that wasn't enough, Joe also shocked everyone by inviting a problematic comedian to his podcast. Yep, I'm talking about Joey Diaz. The guy's like a lightning rod when it comes to controversies, and much of this can be credited to his downright terrible sense of humor. I mean, he thinks sexual harassment stories are funny, and was telling them to Rogan during the podcast episode. Instead of calling out the guy, Joe was actually laughing and having the time of his life. Fans thought that it was really gross of him to do so, especially because the kinds of things Joey was saying were pretty disturbing. He said that he'd use his influence at the Comedy Store to basically pressurize young female comedians into doing sexual acts with him, with the promise of giving them more stage time. That's horrible to even think about. The fact that he may have actually done something like this and felt the need to brag about it just goes to show the kind of person he is, which makes Joe's choice to invite him to his podcast and have a laugh with him even more shocking. The clip spread on social media like wildfire, and even drew in a response from Chelsea Peretti, who called out Diaz and Rogan. But of course, neither of the two really took this seriously, which really only disappointed Joe's fans, many of whom were trying to find some semblance of betterment in his actions. But I guess they're going to have to keep on searching. That said, it's impossible to talk about Joe Rogan's most shocking moments without mentioning this next thing. I'm talking about the time he misinformed his entire audience about the dangers of COVID. It's one thing to laugh at bad jokes, but actually giving people false advice can endanger their lives. It's not something that should be taken lightly at all. But Joe, being Joe, just couldn't help himself. In an episode of his podcast, Joe revealed that he thinks that the COVID-19 vaccine isn't really that important, especially for people who are young and healthy. According to Rogan, people like that don't really need to get vaccinated, since being healthy is enough to keep the virus at bay. Obviously, that flies in the face of what trusted professionals have been saying all this time. But of course, why listen to them when you have Joe, right? People weren't too happy with him saying this. Fans said that Joe should be careful about the things he says on his podcast, especially when it comes to stuff like COVID, which can have huge impacts on a person and the people around them. And it even got the attention of Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. He called Rogan out and explained why his comments were incorrect. But what did Joe do in the face of shocked fans and actual professionals? Well, he stood his ground and called Dr. Fauci a dirty stand-up comedian. I can't even say I'm surprised at this point. In any case, from Joe Rogan's misinforming fans about the dangers of COVID-19 to inviting a controversial personality like Alex Jones to his show, those were all the times Joe Rogan left fans shocked.